Since Paul says, let those of us who are mature think this way, that means he had something specific in mind, right? But a lot of mature Christians disagree on things. How do we know what a mature Christian thinks? I'm Steve, and this is Looking Intently. I put out 3 short videos on the Bible each week. To be notified of those, click the subscribe button in the lower right and then that bell icon. And if you need to catch up on this series in Philippians, you can click this tag in the upper right. We're in chapter 3, verse 15. Paul says there, let those of us who are mature think this way. And if in anything you think otherwise, God will reveal that also to you. Well, it raised 2 questions for me. The first one is, okay, how does a mature Christian think? We're probably tempted to say, well, just like me, of course, right? But how does a mature Christian think? How do we answer that question? And as always, we look to the context. We saw this verses in the middle of a paragraph we looked at in the last video. It's also part of the broader context of the book of Philippians and definitely throughout the New Testament. And it has to do with Paul seeking to warn against the false teaching and to encourage us to maintain our focus on the true gospel when it comes to the place of works. Our works do not play a direct role in our forgiveness and our assurance, our active righteousness. That is based on Christ's passive righteousness, Christ's payment of the penalty for our sins. And I did a video on that. I'll post a link up here about the difference between those 2 types of righteousness. That's what Paul is talking about when he says then, let those of us who are mature think this way. In other words, have this perspective about our works, about grace, about what Christ did, and realize the importance of guarding against the world and Satan's deception. Now, are there other marks of mature Christian thinking? Yeah, there are. But here's a warning. There are also the things that the Bible calls disputable matters. Romans 14:1 talks about those, and we need to be careful not to think, well, if you don't agree with me on those, then you're not a mature Christian, because it's just the opposite. There's another question that's raised in this passage then, the second part of the verse says, and if in anything you think otherwise, God will reveal that also to you. Okay, how's God going to do that? How's he going to let me know I'm not thinking maturely, and here's what the mature way of thinking is on something, specifically in this case, grace and works. If it's supernaturally, if God just causes us to know what it is, here's the problem with that. Why was there false teaching to begin with? Why didn't God supernaturally reveal to them? Now, I suppose you could say they have to be open to it, and for whatever reason, they weren't. All right, but what about 2 people who are open to the truth? And what about when they disagree on things? What's our explanation there? I think the better way to understand this is in light of that same phrase, let those of us who are mature. That still applies with the key mark of maturity being our commitment to God and His truth, whatever it is. Our openness to that, our surrender to what the truth is, even if it's different than I currently think, if it's different than what I've always heard, what my whole group thinks, I need to be open to it. If that's the case, then God will reveal it to me. How? Well, through my study of the Word, through my listening to teaching, and I think specifically how He does it is we'll notice a thread that comes up. You know, the same idea reoccurs as I'm reading, as I'm listening, as I'm talking with other believers. That's God saying to me, hey, you need to get this. This is important. Well, ask yourself, what are your marks of mature Christian thinking? You know, with that in mind, what have you said? Well, this is how or what a mature Christian thinks. One thing I've noticed is that very often our ideas are behavior-based, and that's just the opposite of what Paul was talking about. You know, we often think, well, if you're a mature Christian, you'll agree with me on what a Christian should do and what a Christian shouldn't do. When in fact, that's really the focus of those disputable matters Paul talks about in Romans. Paul's focus here is on grace versus actions. Where's my focus? Is it there? Because if not, this might be a mark that I need to become more mature in my thinking in this area. Once again, I thank you for joining me in this, and as always, I encourage you, read the good book like a good book.